Please take your seats, please. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the 23rd annual Sir Bernard Crossland Lecture. I recently took my role as Pro Vice Chancellor of Physical Science and Engineering, and it's actually, I'm really honored that one of my first duties, public duties, is my new position is to open this lecture. It's my first time actually in this room as well, so I really feel honored. As many of you know, the annual lecture is hosted by the Business Engagement Team at Queen's and Engineers Ireland in association with the Institution of Engineering and Technology. It also forms a part of the bigger program for Northern Ireland, the Northern Ireland Science Festival, with more than 250 exciting events this week taking place in Belfast. Queen's is funder and partner of that festival and has curated 60 events with students and staff. And I really would like to ask you, please have a look at these events because they are very exciting and very promising. This takes time during this whole week. The lecture series is named in honor of our late colleague, Sir Bernard Crossland, who was one of the UK's most respected engineers, contributing not only to Queen's, but also worldwide. Sir Bernard was heavily involved in the lecture series, certainly in the first 11 series, before his death in 2011. So he was very active. He inspired many of us, many students and staff during his time here at Queen's, and we are delighted that the Sir Bernard Crossland Lecture carries on his legacy with this lecture in his name. I would also like to thank the outgoing chair, Sir Bernard Crossland, of the Sir Bernard Crossland Lecture Organizing Committee, Jonathan Hegan, who served the committee since its inception in 2001. Thank you for doing that. I would also like to welcome the incoming chair, Peter Quinn, and thank all the other committee members for organizing this lecture and this very nice event every year. Just a few words about Queen's. Queen's is actually celebrating this year its 180th anniversary. And during those periods, Queen has been working on innovative solutions, coming up with engineering solutions we all need for today's challenges. And since these lectures began in 2011, they have played a pivotal role in developing actually closer ties and closer links with the industry, with our government partners, and with other universities. I think this is very crucial, and certainly as Pro Vice Chancellor for Physical Science and Engineering, I can't emphasize that much more. We really have to do this together to solve the solutions for the future. Queen's is, of course, excellent and well known for its research worldwide, but economically, Queen's also contributes over 3 billion to the local economy every year. And the ties between Queen's and Northern Ireland are very strong, just like Ulster. So with every £1 invested in Queen's, people don't know that, but actually it generates £8 in the UK economy. But the Queen is also active in the regional city deal, the Belfast regional city deal. We are working on transformative projects in advanced manufacturing, digital innovation, and clinical research. And the Belfast region deal should create 4,000 jobs. And we are really very enthusiastic that we are a part of that bigger society to change that. But also in terms of civic impact, Queen's is proud to have offered generations of young people with opportunities to reach their full potential. And actually, we are currently working towards becoming a university of sanctuary, welcoming people seeking sanctuary to facilitate access to higher education and support the local refugee communities. We find that very crucial. And as an anchor institution, we are not just doing research and very good education, but we also believe that we have to be a front runner in the net zero society discussion in Northern Ireland. And we took that ambition. We recently launched a very ambitious net zero plan, which sets our commitment in achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2040. This is challenging, but we feel that we have to take that responsibility. And tonight's lecture will certainly also perhaps give some advice about how to do that in the future. A few words about, because that's why you're here, about the guest speaker of tonight. I would like to introduce Sir Warren East, CBE, President of the Institution of Engineering and Technology. And perhaps for most of us, for most of you in the audience, he does not need so much introduction, but I will try to summarize some of his background and so on. So Warren East was an engineering science graduate of Oxford University. That's that small university very close to London. He's also holder of the MBA from Cranfield University, and Warren's experience includes holding senior leadership positions in ARM Holdings, Rolls-Royce Holdings, where actually he led modernization efforts and advanced the company's journey towards sustainability. He is a distinguished engineer and business leader, renowned for that transformative impact on the technology and engineering sectors, and we are really honored to have him tonight here in this room. So Warren, your talk this evening about climate change and engineer couldn't be more relevant. It has been 10 years after the Paris Agreement, but we still know that it's very clear that humankind is still falling short of our targets and ambitions. So this lecture this evening really will address that. And we all know that climate change is one of the most significant challenges, certainly for the future generations, and certainly for our students in the future, that we have to work on. And the science is clear. We have a short opportunity to act decisively and play our part in tackling this challenge. I look forward, Sir Warren East, to hearing your insights into how we can tackle this shortfall and give us perhaps some advice how to proceed in the future. And please, I would like to welcome our speaker of this evening, Sir Warren East. Welcome.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming along this evening to this talk. I'm going to speak, and I'm going to use some slides as well. I'm going to speak, hopefully, for about 40 minutes, and I hope that will be long enough to allow you the time to dream up some questions to ask me later, and then I'll sit in one of those chairs and do my best to answer the questions you have for me. It's very good to be here in this year when I am taking a year to be president of the IET. I'm actually here not as president of the IET, as in sort of the IET didn't send me. I'm here as Warren East, and so what I have to say is my opinions and my views and my thoughts. I'm not speaking this evening on behalf of the IET, but I'm obviously very conscious of the fact that I'm spending a year as president. So what we're going to talk about, first of all, I'm going to talk, is there really a problem here? A little bit about technology progress. And the purpose of that is to say, let's not despair. Engineers and technologists are creative types, and we have been working on ways to address the problem, if indeed there is a problem. But we have to be realistic. There are some significant challenges ahead, and although I'm going to put a little bit of an engineering slant on this, I can't get away from the fact that actually a lot of these challenges are around business. And business is the vehicle through which engineering delivers benefit to society. And so we need to make sure that we address some of those challenges. But I'm going to finish with an optimistic view, because I have spent the last 40 years being an engineer. I've had an absolutely fantastic time, and I just wish that I was 25 today and starting on a career in engineering, because I think addressing these sorts of challenges is one of the most sort of exciting things that you can possibly do as an engineer. And so Unfortunately, I'm not 25, and so it won't be me, but hopefully we'll have generations of young engineers coming along to address some of these issues. So the world today, is there really a problem? Well, you know, we are bombarded with news 24/7. Quite often it comes through on our phones, but you know, we can see it on the TV. And of course, there are many problems. Some of those problems are probably amplified in our minds by the fact that these days we do get news 24/7. And good news seems to be not real news. We only ever hear bad news, but we do hear bad news about, you know, from a financial point of view, the markets are always in turmoil. There are some serious societal issues going on in lots of the Western democracies, and there's a lot of reporting, thank goodness, on some of the environmental consequences of climate change, and we do see that. There's a lot happening in the world. And it's very easy to get very negative about it. So I tried to be a little bit rational about it and say, well, of course there's a lot happening in the world. If you take the period from 1950 to about today, well, that's 75 years. And I chose 1950 deliberately because it's a round number. And it is about one lifetime. Hopefully it's a little bit shorter than one lifetime for most of the people in this room, but you know, it's sort of circa one lifetime, which is a relatively short period of time. And in that relatively short period of time, the world's population has grown by more than threefold. In fact, depending on how you sort of manipulate the numbers and the numbers that you actually read, and you know, maybe it's nearly a fourfold increase in population over one lifetime. And so, of course, there's going to be lots of stuff happening in the world, because there's 4 times as many people doing the stuff. I think we need to be careful about the resources and energy that we are using as well, because with 3 to 4 times the number of people around, we're clearly doing a lot more, we're making a lot more, we're consuming a lot more, and we're wearing things out, like wearing the planet out, a lot more. Now, back to that wearing the planet out and climate change. And I sort of teased a bit to start with by having a subtitle that talked about some of the inconvenient truths of the challenges ahead. And I teased a bit by saying, if indeed there is a problem. You will pick up that I believe there is a problem. Amazingly, in 2025, there are still significant numbers of people that don't actually believe there's a problem. You know, most recently, some of the political mood has been changing, and you know, certainly since the 20th of January, we've seen a number of companies step back from their positions on climate change and what they're going to do about it. And for me, that is quite a worrying step back. And you know, hearing nonsense about drill baby drill and all that sort of thing, really, I do find a bit worrying. But anyway, these people, their point is, hopefully the slide will change in a minute. I might have to get you to just advance the slide. Oh, there we are. Their point is, well, what's the problem? The world has been a lot hotter. The picture's changed a bit, of course, with the world a lot hotter. You know, short term, of course it's okay. I mean, it's just, what, you know, a degree and a half, a bit hotter than it was 200 years ago. What's the big deal? The torrential rain that, when you have torrential rain in Spain and a number of people get displaced and people get killed and so on, well, let's just blame the government. because clearly it was the Spanish government's fault that they weren't prepared for the torrential rain. Clearly it was the Californian Fire Service problem and their fault that they weren't prepared for the fires that happened around the turn of the year around Los Angeles. It isn't really a problem with climate change, and so we can go on and the world can get a little bit hotter again, and a little bit hotter again, and it's absolutely fine. And as one generation moves on to another, it's only a little bit warmer, until actually, by the time we get to this picture, there isn't a lot of life left. The problem isn't for the planet, the problem is for living things, and in particular, being a bit selfish about it, the problem is for human beings and human society, because we've evolved to live in a world which is a little bit cooler than the world that the climate cynics believe is okay. So why should we actually bother? This is a bit selfish. This is a picture of my daughter. It's a picture of my daughter with her husband and her little boy. And that's why I think we should bother, because they are the future. And it might be all right, actually, for my daughter if we didn't do anything. And it might be all right, actually, for her son if we didn't do anything. And it might be all right for the next generation. And it might even be all right for the generation after that. I've been staying with some friends at Strangford Lock, just down the road, and their garden is about as high above the lock as this platform is from the main floor. So actually, I don't think it would be good for multiple generations. And the important thing is that there's a huge amount of inertia in the climate system, and we need to act before it's too late. I do think that it is a necessity that we act, and I do think that this is one of those things which probably is a once in a 10 generations opportunity for humankind, modern society, to grasp a problem and do something about it. It's, I would say, as significant as people hopping in boats and moving from one continent to another in the age of massive age of exploration that occurred after Enlightenment and so on. And I think, actually, as an engineer, where engineering profession can do something about this, it's this once in a 10 generations opportunity, and it's a great privilege to be an engineer at that time, because not many people will get an opportunity to have such a big impact on human society as the generation that is going through, because we actually have to address this over the next generation or so. We haven't got that long to address it. So anyway, enough of an introduction. Now it's a bit of reality. It's obviously going to cost a huge amount of money wherever you are in the world. It's going to cost a huge amount of money. What's the problem with that? Well, it's a little bit more reality. Promises. Here's a pile of presents. I'm a parent. I've been a parent. Many of us in this room are parents, and every Christmas we kind of make promises, and then we deliver on those promises, and we have piles of presents and so on. Sometimes those presents possibly cost us a little bit more than we would have liked, and so we slightly overstretch. Actually, the same problem exists with governments. Governments, in particular, that need to get elected every so often. They have to make promises too in order to get elected. And they have to make better promises than their predecessors. Unlike parents, the children don't grow up. The electorate still needs promises next time and next time and next time. And so over decades, undeliverable promises, that pile of presents builds up, the debt builds up. And you can see that in the graphs here. I mean, these graphs go back for a couple of decades. There is an inexorable trend up and to the right here as governments have accumulated large amounts of debt. And this is debt as a proportion of GDP in a selection of Western economies. So it's illustrative, but it's pretty consistent, and these are some of the big economies as well. So we do have a little bit of reality, the consequences of those promises. And the consequence is that it's obviously much harder to deal with that massive cost that we know we've got to deal with if we're starting from the basis of a massive amount of debt in the first place. And I think that's an important context that we have to bear in mind. And what it says is that we can't rely on governments to solve this problem. Governments obviously have a role to play in providing context, but there is no magic money tree, and this problem has to be addressed with the private sector as well as government. Now, enough of that doom and gloom. I'm now going to talk a little bit more optimistically to start with, because we have had some great progress. As I was traveling over here yesterday, I came from Birmingham Airport. And I hadn't been to Birmingham Airport for a few years. And I noticed out the window of the airplane, great big solar development on the side of the runway at Birmingham Airport. And you are seeing solar popping up all over the place. We have, where I live, just outside Cambridge, we have a solar farm that construction is due to start sometime in the next 18 months or so, with a connection to the grid around 2028, a roughly 60 megawatt solar farm covering about 180 acres. This stuff is real. And it can be real because we've made great progress in bringing down the cost of solar panels. The cost has come down consistently by around 20% for every doubling of capacity, it says. What you've got there is a virtuous circle. Because the cost comes down a bit, so we can afford to install more, so the volume goes up, so the cost comes down more, and there is a virtuous circle. And that's the kind of virtuous circle that has worked in the semiconductor industry, for instance, where the compute power that we have today is phenomenal compared with the compute power that we had in 1975, and that's fundamentally because we can afford it, because the cost has come down the same curve. Now, I stole the picture on the left-hand side of the slide from Adair Turner, who was one of the first committee chairs of the UK's Committee on Climate Change. And he is a solar enthusiast, and it was he who pointed out to me that if you go into European supermarkets, probably in Northern Ireland as well, certainly around Cambridge, you go in the front door of Tesco, and at this time of year they'll be selling barbecues and picnic tables as everybody contemplates the summer, and they've got sort of picnic tables on offer. Well, this Spanish supermarket that Adair spotted, not only were they selling picnic tables or barbecues or whatever, they were selling 500 watt solar panels for less than €100. It's now become a consumer product that you can buy at the supermarket. So this is fantastic progress that engineers have made in terms of solar technology. So there is some good news out there. Electric vehicles, more good news. We're seeing increase. You drive around in in Britain, and increasingly more and more of those green number plates are coming. The histograms, I apologize, now I see them on the slide. If you're sat at the back of the room, there's absolutely no way you can read any of the words that are on that slide, but the histogram on the left shows that in absolute terms, the big economies, like China at the top, Europe second bar down, in absolute terms, we're selling lots of electric vehicles. On a per head basis, the histogram on the right shows that China still has, a long way to go. And Norway, the green bar at the bottom, is really setting the bar. And if the rest of the world could catch up with Norway on a per head population on electric vehicles, we would really be making progress on transitioning the fleet of cars in the world from fossil fuels to electric. However, some of the cynics say, all those electric cars in China? Coal-fired cars. Because, of course, coal-fired power stations deliver electricity, which consumers then use to charge up the vehicles. Except China is actually making more progress than most countries on the planet in terms of renewable energy. But the important point is, electric vehicles great, but only great if we charge them with electricity that is zero carbon electricity. Coming to the UK, because it's a little bit easier for us here to sort of get our heads around the UK, and looking at a recent decade, 2011 to 2021, you can see a transition going on and a typical sort of technology adoption curve where it's all a bit slow to start with, and the early adopters get in there, and then things actually start to take off. And by 2021, we have about 20% of the new vehicles registered in the UK being electric vehicles. By 2023, which is obviously not on the histogram, but I dug the figures up, it's closer to 25%. And so it's fundamentally a good news story. Now, a little bit of caution. First of all, we've got to generate the electricity, as I say, and it has to be zero carbon electricity. Second, how many miles, think how many miles do you drive in a year in a car? Let's suppose the average might be about 10,000 miles a year. 10,000 miles a year is about 3 and a bit megawatt hours. An average house in the UK is 5 and a bit megawatt hours. So actually, if we are successful in transitioning the fleet to electric vehicles, then the grid needs to deliver more electricity, roughly to the tune of building, say, 50% of the housing stock that exists at the moment. So if we suddenly built 50% of the existing housing stock, this would pose quite a challenge to the grid in the UK to deliver that electricity, and it has to be delivered, and delivered as in down the final mile to all those vehicles. So we're making progress. That's very good. It still depends on charging with zero carbon electricity, and there's a bit of infrastructure development that needs to happen. So sticking with the UK and picking up on the point that it has to be zero carbon electricity, what sort of progress are we making? Good news is that the National Energy Systems Operator publishes regular data and even has an app, so you can find out what's going on more or less as we speak in terms of electricity consumption in the UK. Well, the good news is that we are now getting increasingly many more days of the year where more than 50% of the electricity in the UK that gets used is zero carbon. So it's either wind, or it's solar, or it's nuclear, or it's a tiny bit of hydro. And that is good news, because it's over the last couple of decades we've removed coal completely, we are making progress. Compared with countries like Norway, still quite a long way behind. Norway's about 96% zero carbon, but the UK is making progress. So let's have a look at some facts and figures behind that progress. Again, the same source for these facts and figures, National Energy Systems Operator, well, HMG, but through National Energy Systems Operator. Yeah, wind and solar between them, and hydro, 30%. That's good. We can make a few observations here, though. So in order to deliver all the electrical energy that we need, we only need to build about twice as much as we've already built completely over multiple years since we started building it. That's quite a lot still to build, twice as much as we've already built. Plus, you have to think about, all those electric vehicles and needing to deliver a load more electricity. So how are we going to build that? How much is it going to cost? We come to the bottom of the slide, and we can see that, yeah, you can see why there's a bit of a debate. Is it solar? Is it wind? Because wind is obviously much more expensive from a CapEx point of view and from an OpEx point of view, but solar is much less effective. Looking at the top of the slide again and looking at the difference between June and December, you see, as you'd expect, a massive seasonal variation. And so there are some issues, and the issues I've illustrated down the left-hand side of the slide, but let's talk about those issues in just a little bit more detail. Obviously, a huge capacity increase is still required, but the main issue is that wind and solar are, of course, intermittent, and there is massive volatility. I don't know what it's been like here in Belfast, but in Cambridge we haven't seen the sun for a fortnight, and that's fine. That's February. In July and August, then we see the sun most days. So there's volatility, and there's a massive seasonal difference as a result of weather. If you think about solar for a moment, then of course there's a massive seasonal difference just because of where we sit at, where are we in Belfast? Probably about 54 degrees north of the equator. And actually, a lot of the economic activity that goes on in the world happens in these sorts of latitudes. So a lot of the energy consumption that goes on in the world is in these sorts of latitudes. And at 52, 54 degrees away from the equator, the difference between the middle of winter and the middle of summer is more than a factor of 2 just in terms of daylight. And that's before you get to the weather. So there is a huge seasonal difference, and therefore there is a massive amount of storage required to make use of the intermittent energies, the wind and the solar. And just to think about some of that massive use, remember that solar farm I was talking about that is happening near where I live? Well, that's about 60 megawatts, as I said. Well, 40 megawatt hours of battery takes about 2,000 square meters of footprint on the ground if it's in sort of shipping container type height. And obviously we don't want massive battery structures. So 2,000 square meters, quite hard to imagine. A motorway, a 2-lane sort of dual carriageway motorway with a central reservation and a couple of hard shoulders to do 2,000 square meters is about 100 meters of motorway. Therefore, if you wanted to take summer at that little solar farm, little solar farm. It's only 60 megawatts, right? It's just outside the village, and you wanted to store that. You've got a lot of motorway to take, say, 4 months, which is roughly 1,000 times an hour, roughly 1,000 hours. So it's just a massive amount of storage required, and the cost of that is going to be pretty huge as well. So the conclusion for that from me is that you need more than just, I mean, obviously renewables are going to be part of the problem, part of the solution, but you do need nuclear or tidal or something to provide zero carbon baseload when addressing that. Or you need some other form of storage that isn't batteries. So the answer in Norway, where they have lots of hydro, is to take some of that hydro and say, we're not going to use it to just generate electricity now. We're going to take some of that generative capacity and we're going to use it as storage. There are sort of schemes even in the UK where we're hollowing out mountains and pumping water into the mountains and creating effectively large hydro batteries. And so there's not one answer here, but there's massive storage required, and there is baseload that is non-intermittent that is required. I think, if I can advance the slide. Oh dear, sorry about this. There we go. So I finished on nuclear. Personally, I believe nuclear is an inevitability. We need to switch the debate on nuclear from not, do we need nuclear, to, of course we need nuclear. How are we going to install enough nuclear capacity? And that's where I'm slightly biased if I wear a Rolls-Royce hat for a moment. SMRs, I think, is a good solution compared with large-scale nuclear. Public opinion, fortunately, is turning. Of course, we have to investigate things like nuclear fusion in the future. Because of course nuclear fission does have issues around the waste, nuclear waste that is produced. But we can't wait for nuclear fusion. Nuclear fusion's 20 years away. It has been 20 years away for decades. Personally, I do believe we are getting closer. It's no longer a rolling 20 years. We are actually getting there, and it might be 17 years, it might be 18 years, it might be 23 years. But it's not a rolling 20 years anymore, because a lot of the science has been done, and now it's turning into an engineering issue, and we know that once it becomes an engineering issue, then it's just a matter of time and money, but fusion will happen. But in the meantime, we can't wait for fusion to happen. It's not guaranteed that it's going to happen. I believe the probability of it happening is a lot greater than perhaps we would have put on that 20, 30, 40 years ago. But it's probably going to happen. It might not, and it might take a little bit longer. And so we have to embrace fission for the time being. Grid infrastructure. Grid infrastructure, obviously, we've got issues like the electrifying more of our economy. But if I come back to that little solar farm in rural Cambridgeshire, and the planning permission for that and the project, was all ready to go in 2020. It's now 2025. And it hasn't started yet, and it might start sometime in the next 18 months to 2 years. What has been holding it up? Oh, a grid connection. Because, and the same goes for some of the offshore wind projects in the North Sea. What has been holding them up? Oh, a grid connection. Either it's something to do with planning, or it's capital allocation. In terms of the grid. So a massive amount of work needs to be done on the grid infrastructure. The seasonal storage I've talked about, the money and the physical resources. And then we get to we get to some of the really difficult problems in the difficult bucket. If we get to 20 whenever, and we've got 100% of our electricity generated by zero carbon means, somehow, through the other things, well, we've still only solved 20% of the problem. There's 80% of the problem still to go. And I was talking with somebody here earlier on in the day, and they were telling me that in Northern Ireland it's even worse. There's 85% of the problem still to go once we've decarbonised the electricity requirements in Northern Ireland. And then in that 80%, you've got some really quite challenging sectors to abate. Aviation is one that is an easy target for people to say, well, the answer's easy, we just stop flying. Except that society kind of depends on flying. 40% of what's flying around above our heads at the moment is not people going on holiday to Tenerife. 40% of it is essential goods which are flying around that our economies depend on. It's cargo. And then you've got sectors like steel, cement, glass. I mean, steel and cement between them deliver 10 times as much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere as the whole of aviation. And I can't imagine our society working particularly well without steel and cement. Are we going to give that up as easily as we simply tell people not to book flights with EasyJet? I don't think so. So these are difficult sectors, and what this says is that we need to adopt other solutions as well as electrification. So we do need hydrogen-powered blast furnaces. We do need to capture the carbon dioxide because the chemical reactions involved in creating cement just produce carbon dioxide. It's nothing to do with the energy, it's chemistry. And the only way that we can abate the carbon pollutions from some of those sectors is to capture the carbon dioxide. How are we going to do all that? We're going to do it with business. Back to what I said at the start, that this isn't just something that we can all whinge about and say, why doesn't the government do? We as engineers can drive this through business. Here's a little model. And I apologize again, when I came in here this afternoon and stood at the back of the room, I realized that at the back of the room you probably can't see the words on my model, but anyway, I've got a bunch of science on the left delivering into an engineering organization, and the engineers take that science and create some technologies with it and turn it into useful products and services and deliver a benefit to society through customers at the other end. And that's a very simple model. And the costs go in one direction, and the revenues flow in the other direction. The original input, of course, is human creativity. That's where the understanding of the science comes from, and that's where the understanding of how to turn that science into technologies that deliver benefit for society comes from. It's not quite as simple as that, because the business has some investment, and the investment typically, sometimes governments will stimulate a sector by investing in a sector, government grants and that sort of thing, which are effectively just a funding mechanism to transfer, well, it's a financing mechanism. Most of the finance in the private sector comes from investors, and investors have to invest, and that's why it's important for the business to make a profit. So if the value is flowing in one direction and the revenue is flowing in the other direction, the challenge for the engineering business is to make sure that those products and services cost less to deliver than the customers are prepared to pay for them, so that the business generates a profit. That is absolutely essential, because the business needs to generate a profit, not only to invest in the next cycle, but also so that they can pay a return to the investors to make sure that the investors can continue to invest, and they can pay tax to the government, so that not only can the government invest in things like universities to stimulate research in universities, but supply or distribute some of that tax income in the form of services, health, education, and the like, to make a better society. So when I talk about engineering delivering benefit to society, it isn't just the products and services and helping us address the climate change. It's about generating money to make society work. Now, this model is fine, except as far as some of these climate change technologies that I've been talking about are concerned, it's a bit broken. Because lots of what we need to develop, particularly to address those hard-to-abate sectors, technologies are actually quite immature at the moment. Science is there, but we need to do some engineering on it. And the investors have gone and raised money from pension funds and the like. And in raising that money, they have promised a certain risk and return profile to their investors. And that risk and return profile doesn't match some of this relatively immature technology. So it's quite high risk, it may or may not work, and even if it does work, it's going to take twice as long to deliver a return to the investors as the number you first thought of. And so that model is a little bit broken, and we need to address that issue around investment, and I think that is one of the challenges that we face. So, bringing that issue and compiling it with a handful of the other issues that we've identified, the business model, the risk and return, I've just talked about. I talked about decarbonising our electricity, and governments glibly talk about, particularly UK government talks about, we're going to get there by 2030 because we're going to build loads more wind farms and install loads more solar, and we're going to be there by 2030. Unfortunately, this message then gets amplified by communicators that normally we should trust, like journalists. I think it's a little bit of a challenge that the BBC, for instance, talks about getting to zero carbon energy by 2030 in the UK, when what they really mean is zero carbon electricity for the sectors that are electrified at the moment, and there's still 80% of the problem still to solve. So they don't really mean that, but a problem is that the public hears that. And when we hear it, we think, oh, actually it's nearly done then. It's not that, what's the big problem? And if it isn't done quite by 2030, that'll be all right, it'll be 2032 or 2033. Unfortunately, that leads to complacency, which is, I think, another big issue in all of this. The communication, or rather the slight miscommunication, generates complacency. And that complacency, of course, is very useful as far as the politics is concerned, because as far as getting re-elected is concerned, we don't have to mess with some of this sort of slightly inconvenient things. We can tell a story that we're making the energy transition and it's all happening. Furthermore, in politics, of course, we need to do some things which are perhaps socially less acceptable, and part of the challenge that the politicians face is they need to actually address some of that and do something about it, not just accept the fact that, well, the public doesn't like having nuclear power stations, or the public doesn't, we can convince people that we've solved the aviation problem by having 1 or 2% of the aviation fuel as synthetic, when really it needs to be 100% of the aviation fuel that needs to be synthetic, but the carbon for that needs to come from proper zero carbon sources to make it, and therefore that means a little bit of a discussion about how much land do we allocate to growing crops for food, and how much do we allocate for growing crops for sources for things like synthetic fuel. The other issue is, of course, and we as engineers understand this probably,
there is no one right answer. There is no magic bullet in all of this. So I think that's a reasonable list of some of the challenges, and I'm slightly running out of time, so I'm not going to go into detail on the rest. But I do think one of the challenges that we have as engineers is sometimes we are very tempted to take our creation and try and make it a little bit better. Now, a good example, what we did at Rolls-Royce with SMRs was say, yeah, of course we could make a better nuclear reactor or better type of nuclear reactor than that which we've been stuffing in nuclear submarines for the last 60 years. But actually, we know that works. And so let's build an SMR based on that technology rather than some esoteric thing that still needs a lot of science and engineering to be done. So that's quite difficult for engineers to do because they always want to create a slightly better solution. And some of the other issues that I see are a little bit of siloism and a lack of consideration of the whole solution. Ecosystems are very important, so it's fine to have some chemistry that you can capture carbon dioxide with. It's fine to wrap some engineering around that chemistry, and you can even make it work. But unfortunately, if you can't connect to a pipeline that is going to store that carbon dioxide and turn it into rock, then the ecosystem isn't there, and there's no business case for actually investing in that capturing of the carbon dioxide. And then, of course, well, I think the news that has, or the political news that has dominated the agenda since the American election is one piece of geopolitics. The fact that the world is moving away from globalization into sort of separation, and the geopolitics that exists around China is a bit of a challenge as well, because we need to have a worldwide solution, not countrywide solutions. I'm just going to skip on. I will tell you about Antoine in the Q&A if we have time for that. I'm just going to finish with a bit of looking forward here, and being a bit more optimistic now. We have the technology required. Engineering can solve the problems. Business can deliver it, but we need to address some of those challenges that I talked about. I do have a lot of sympathy for the politicians. Apologies for being a little bit cynical, perhaps, in some of what I have just been saying, but energy transition is just one of the issues that politicians have to deal with. They have to deal with, are we going to deal with climate change and mitigation, or are we going to deal with energy transition? Oh, actually, we've got a lot of investment and money to spend on things like health and keeping the population healthy. Oh, we need to catch up with some other countries in the world on AI because we have to be ahead in AI. So, there are a lot of challenges, and this is a balancing act. And I've talked about some of the other points on this. I would just say one point to draw out, the penultimate bullet on this slide. Business is going to deliver. Politics will create the environment in time. But it is all about the people. And it's all about the communication with the people. To close on an optimistic note, semiconductor world, I spent 30 years in the semiconductor world, and I've got these two wafers on the wall at home. The bottom one is a 4-bit microprocessor I worked on in the 1980s, and each one of those chips that's about as big as your fingernail contains 8,000 transistors. When I left ARM about 12 years ago, they gave me this wafer at the top, and each one of those chips is again about the size of your fingernail, with an ARM microprocessor in the middle of it, and each one has 2.3 billion transistors. As opposed to the 8,000. And that was in the course of a 30-year career in the semiconductor world. So engineering really can deliver when we put our minds to it. Shortly before I left Rolls-Royce, we broke the electric speed record for flight. And we didn't break it by 10%, we broke it by more than 100%. And I'd like to equate that electric airplane breaking the speed record in 2021 to the smaller wafer on the bottom of the slide, and think about where does that take a difficult to abate sector like aviation over the 30 years that follows, knowing what engineering can do. And with that, I've overstayed my welcome in terms of talking, and we've now got a slightly shorter Q&A session than originally planned, but over to Q&A.
Thank you so much for such a thought-provoking presentation, talk. For the more astute in the audience, you probably realise I'm not Karen Rafferty, but I am a professor of structural engineering. My name is Sue Taylor, and I lead the Intelligent and Sustainable Infrastructure Group here at Queen's. And I do believe our clever researchers are going to create net zero concrete, and that we'd like to add wave renewables as well to your title. So we've got some questions that were pre-submitted, so if we could just start with those. How can we improve business engagement between universities and industries to get technology to the market quicker?
I was talking with a few people about this question when we were having a quick coffee before we started. A bit like I had on a bullet on one of those slides, that in the business it's all about people. And so it is between businesses, it's all about people. You don't have company A doing business with company B. You actually have the people in company A doing business with the people in company B. And you don't have businesses having a relationship with a university. You do over a period of time. But what's actually happening is people interacting with other people. And there has to be trust between those people on both sides, and that trust has to be developed and earned. And in my experience, I've seen some really good collaboration with university, and I've seen stuff which is less effective. And where it's good, you have trust between the people, and that trust means letting go. From a business point of view, it means saying, okay, we're going to hand this piece of work over, and the university is going to make however many PhDs they want to make out of it, and we will have the results back, and we've got an agreement about how the IP transfers and all that sort of thing. But this trust, and the trust can be there from the company because the trust has been earned by those academics over a period of time. So I think it's concentrate on those personal relationships, work on something which is real and tangible from the business point of view, and from the business point of view, then we have to hand over and trust.
And I guess something like knowledge transfer partnerships, I know Rolls-Royce have done many of them, is an opportunity to take that.
Well, absolutely. I say, we have to get the contractual bits right around, what happens with IP, and, as long as those agreements are in place, then you can come up with a lot of different constructs for how the collaboration actually takes place. But fundamentally, you have to get the people bit right.
And the second question is, how do you see the role of innovative tools like 3D digital twins evolving in advancing sustainability?
So, the engineering process involves, concept, design, test, and sometimes that can take a long time. Sometimes it's very expensive when you develop real stuff. And so tools like digital twins enable us to experiment and go around those iterative design, create, test loops much faster. And that's where I think, engineering productivity over decades continues to improve. The reason you can get that progress in those chips and move from 8,000 transistors to 2.3 billion transistors is because the tools that the engineers use to design them get a lot better. And you can go around those loops much faster, and you can automate parts of the design. So innovative tools, whether they be digital twins or other forms of innovative tools like AI, for instance, they become part of the engineering process, and that's how they help. And I think they're going to play a great role in advancing some of the technologies that we've talked about. Whether it's designing a wind turbine or whether it's designing a chemical or a piece of chemical plant, that fundamental design process still needs to take place. And if we can use tools to make it happen faster, make it happen more reliability, great.
I think I agree with you on that. So engineering can be risk averse and slow to adopt new technology and new methodologies. What are some approaches and techniques to quashing risk aversion?
Again, I apologize for being a little bit boring here, but it's about the people. Some cultures are more risk averse than other cultures. Some people are more risk averse than other people. I think part of the challenge and the role of the leadership in the engineering businesses is to manage. It's about managing risk. It's about deploying capital in a risky environment and managing that. And sometimes that means sticking with risk aversion. But sometimes it's recognizing the fact that nothing ventured, nothing gained. You absolutely need to take some risk. Otherwise, we'd just stand still and we wouldn't do anything. And so it is in business that you wouldn't. And so part of the job is to put some capital at risk, put some resource at risk, take risk on customers that you haven't worked with before, take risk on suppliers you haven't worked with before. It's about people and the leadership of those businesses understanding the risk and taking it. And then communicating with others in the business, communicating with the younger people, telling people it's okay to make a mistake. Part of the risk aversion is because people think it's very career limiting to make a mistake. Well, if I'm designing an airplane and a lot of people get killed because I haven't done a good design, well, of course it's career limiting if I make a mistake. You need to be practical about this. There are some pieces of engineering that we do which are where safety is incredibly important, and you should absolutely not be taking risk at all. That still doesn't mean that difficult problems you shouldn't be addressing. Otherwise, we'd never have aeroplanes. I think it's about understanding, both from a technical point of view and a commercial point of view, the risks and then managing those risks.
I would say it can be career-making in research to be a risk taker.
Totally. And it should be career-making as well. Providing it's managed correctly, it should absolutely be career-making, not career-limiting. Part of the role of senior management is to create that environment so that people understand they have to take some risk, and it's okay. And it's okay to ask for help as well.
So the final question, you did touch on AI, and I know we had I'd say quite a heated debate at our industry advisory board on AI. And the question is, how do you see AI supporting and developing engineering solutions?
Oh, well, I think I've sort of already answered this. I mean, I count AI, covers a multitude of sins. I count the adoption of AI as the adoption of any other tool that has helped the engineering world move on over the last multiple decades. If you visit the Concorde Museum in Bristol, you'll see some of the original design works, and You can see some of the slide rules that they use to do the sums. You know, well, we wouldn't design an aeroplane like Concorde today with slide rules, would we? But we use what's available to us. And if AI is available to us, then we need to harness that capability and use it for good.
Thank you. We do have time for questions from the audience. There's a roving microphone, so if you can please use that. And also it'd be nice if you could introduce yourself as well. If you just raise your hand.
I did give you 40-something minutes to come up with questions.
Thanks. Joe Devlin, Corporate Development Manager at Energia Group. We're a vertically integrated utility operating on the island of Ireland. So Warren, I'm sure you've made quite a number of very big, important decisions over the course of your career. Which one cost you the most sleep, and what did you learn from it?
That is an excellent question. I mean, the trouble is it's always the most recent one, which causes you to lose most sleep because you've learnt from all the others. So an early one was when I was in the days when I was programming in assembler, and I managed to lose the source code for about 8 months of development that I'd been doing. And the only way that I could recreate it was by taking an EEPROM, which just had literally bits and bytes, and use a reverse assembler, which of course doesn't understand all the labels and the jumps and the subroutines and those sorts of things. And I had to recreate it like that. And the decision I made was to do that without telling my boss. And that cost me a lot of sleep. I did get it back, by the way, and you know, the product was fine at the end of the day, and my boss was absolutely fine with it as well. But that cost me a lot of sleep. Being a bit more serious about it, more recently, I lost a lot of sleep over the rights issue that we did at Rolls-Royce. That was a rock and a hard place if ever there was one. Rolls-Royce has a lot of private investors, as well as you know, individuals like you and me, as well as institutional investors. And doing a rights issue is where you say to existing investors, cough up, or you will get diluted. And obviously institutional investors, typically they can be sort of persuaded and you know, they will invest. Private individuals might want to invest, but particularly 6 months into COVID, didn't necessarily have the financial means to invest. So should we have more debt and less rights issue? When should we go after that rights issue? Investors wanted us to take on more debt. More debt increases the risk. More debt is better for the private shareholders because there's less rights issue. And you have to do something because you're running an iconic engineering company that started out COVID bleeding £40 million of cash every day because there's a supply chain to keep going, because otherwise those supply chain companies are going to go bust if you don't keep paying them. And then there won't be a supply chain. Or, either you go for it and raise the money, or it's oblivion. And I did not want to be the CEO overseeing the second bankruptcy of Rolls-Royce. So that was probably didn't sleep much for months.
So I think we've got another question here first and then one at the back. Yeah, Peter, yeah.
Thank you very much. Frank Given from Engineers Ireland. Thank you very much for your talk. It was brilliant. Really appreciate that. You mentioned about the lack of maturity in some areas of some of the things we're going to need to make ourselves a more sustainable future. What are those areas you see are the most pressing following the energy transition? And more importantly, who pays for it?
Yeah, I mean, there is no easy answer to what is the most pressing in terms of immature technologies. But I think energy storage for us around the transition is a big issue. Okay? Clearly, we can't afford, and there isn't enough money, and there isn't enough in the way of raw materials to use the traditional batteries that we deploy at the moment. And I took the numbers from data sheets of battery energy storage systems and talked about lengths of motorways and all that sort of thing. It's infeasible. So we need alternative approaches to energy storage. Digging holes in mountains is very costly. And it's not necessarily, in some countries it works because they're naturally hilly and they've got lots of lakes up mountains and all those sorts of things, and you can adapt reasonably simply. But in countries like the UK, where the highest mountain in the UK is only about 1,300 meters, that's not really solving the problem. So you need alternative solutions like cryogenic stuff, like hydrogen, and these are immature technologies. Hydrogen has been a sort of promised thing for decades, and all the public can remember is the Heidelberg disaster from a century ago. And so, clearly there needs to be some work done on things like hydrogen as a store of energy, if it's going to deliver on the promises that we as engineers believe it can deliver on. But that general area of storage, I think, is one that we need to pay a lot of attention to.
Thank you. I think we had a question at the back as well. Yeah.
Thanks, Robert Eady. I really appreciated your talk tonight. It was really, really good. I'm going to play a wee bit of devil's advocate, if that's okay. EVs, 60% more carbon in the production of an EV than a petrol or a diesel car. How do you see the use of EVs promoting your net carbon actual vision? Secondly, emission analytics, research on the likes of pollutants from tires and brakes in relation to EVs being 1,000 times more pollutant than petrol and diesel. In which way do you see, I know that is an extreme case that they've taken, but even half of that, are we still promoting something that's going the opposite way from where we should be? I'm thinking of your comment about the grid. And if you look at the Northern Ireland grid, there's many, many places that it's impossible to put fast chargers, for example. There's a statistic across the UK, 44% of housing can't charge EV cars at home. If you actually again look at the likes of around the masonettes, the types, the expense that would cost to actually change those to allow people to use and charge EVs against using fast chargers, which are actually more expensive than diesel and petrol. I know I'm playing devil's advocate, but
there's a few questions.
The promotion
within that one question.
of EVs.
Yeah. And I think if you sort of extrapolate it generally, what you're saying is actually EVs are certainly not a panacea for the automotive sector. And indeed, I as a private investor, I'm invested in a hydrogen fuel cell automotive venture, and most of the big automotive companies, I think you'll find, have hydrogen fuel cell programs underway. So it isn't necessary. EVs are not necessarily a panacea, and I also fully acknowledge that a bunch of the EVs in the world at the moment are effectively coal-powered, and you know that's clearly not good. However, sometimes we have to work with technology that isn't perfect in the first instance, and then make it better. Because if we sat down and waited for perfection, then we'd never move. And the nuclear fission, nuclear fusion thing is an example of that. The SAF in aeroplanes versus hydrogen is another example of that. I do believe we have to take some risks with this on technology that isn't fully mature. I think the EVs also illustrate another point that I made, which is about considering the whole ecosystem. And you talked about the charging network, and I talked about the amount of extra development that has to happen in the grid to make these things happen. Well, you know, we do need to consider the whole system, and it's perfectly possible that we'll be sat here at the 40th Sir Bernard Crossland lecture in 15 years' time, and EVs might be, you know, a thing of the past, a bit like what was it? The BHS Betamax videos, and the ones which didn't actually prosper in the long run because we couldn't get the whole thing right. So I wouldn't seek to argue with you at the moment, but I think we need to, you know, the transport sector is reliant on fossil fuels at the moment. We have to do something about shifting that. Whether the answer is making EVs better and the ecosystem around EVs better, or whether it is using an alternative store of energy like hydrogen, I don't know what the answer is at the moment, and I note that the automotive companies are hedging their bets.
So is the bus system as well.
Yes.
So with that, I think in the interest of time, we do need to move on to our vote of thanks. I'd like to thank you very much myself and for the opportunity of sitting up here with you. So if I can welcome Laura Burke, President of Engineers Ireland, for the closing remarks. Thank you.
And first of all, I'd like to thank our hosts in Queen's University Belfast. It is absolutely fabulous venue to have a lecture on such an important topic that looking at even the talks there were, and it was so interesting, this piece around innovation, research, the need for us all to be innovating all the time, but also I think in the context of the lecture, the positivity that comes out of it, because you can be overwhelmed, as you say, about some of the challenge, but actually, you know, we're always innovating, changing, evolving, and here's a perfect opportunity to do that. And then finally, that mix between technology, which of course we need, and we need to evolve our technology, but it kept coming down to it's all about the people, and it's all about us, and it's how we interact and how we work with each other. So just to thank you very much. As I said, I'm sure there'll be lots of conversation as people are walking out the door, and you've left us with lots of food for thought. So thank you very much. And slightly dangerously, I have to hand you over a photo of thanks.
Wow.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed.